So this video is called Gaming Systems I Own or Have Owned in the Past that were not really popular or super successful. And I really don't have a whole lot of photos of all the stuff, but this right here is an Atari 7800 Pro system. It was designed to be the next thing after the Atari 2600. And it might have been designed to compete with like the Commodore 64. Some of the problems here were the joysticks that they released in North America were horrible. They were like hand cramp inducing. They did release, I think, a control pad similar to like the Sega Master System or, Nintendo controller, with, where you play with your thumbs like this versus a joystick that was just not very comfortable. And another thing is that they used the old Atari 2600 sound chip inside of the system. The graphics were obviously better than the Atari 2600, probably better than Intellivision, ColecoVision, and all that, and probably heading more toward kind of the NES 8-bit system, game depending. So the problem with that sound chip issue was the Atari 2600 did not have a very good, high-tech sound chip, and some games were released with an upgraded sound chip. I think Commando and a few others that had the higher quality sound. So that was definitely a big issue. They should have just spent an extra $5 or whatever and put that sound chip in the console. That way, all the games could take advantage of the chip instead of having to put the chip in each game. And it kind of reminds me of like the Nintendo system. Their first games, weren't as graphically great as some of the later games, because in order to get some of the better graphics and compete with stuff like the Atari 7800 and Commodore 64 and a lot of them, was they needed to add RAM to the cards. So they needed more memory to make the graphics slightly better. So the next system would be maybe the Sega Master System. Like this is a Master System game here, Double Dragon, and it too, I think, as a base system, had like better graphics than the NES that it was competing with. But again, Nintendo had a lot of licenses for a lot of games, and they had the option to add more RAM to the cart and make them more graphically better. And what's interesting is this is Double Dragon, and I like this port probably more than any other port I've played, including the NES port. It had some exclusives like Phantasy Star that started the whole kind of Phantasy Star 2, 3, 4, then PSO Online, Episode 1, 2, Blue Burst, and there's, I don't know what they're like, Online 5 now, or Episode 5 or something. It was a pretty cool series, role-playing series. There was like Golden Axe Warrior, another like exclusive RPG, and a couple other RPGs and shooters and things like that. And they also had I guess field sequential 3D graphics. You could get a 3D glasses kit for it and play a number of 3D games. And I'm sure it wasn't really high tech. There was probably a lot of flicker and stuff, but That's something, Nintendo didn't really have. Next would be the TurboGrafx 16 and TurboGrafx 16 CD add-on and the Turbo Duo. So when the TurboGrafx 16 was just about to leave the market, I guess you would say, they were selling them like on clearance for like $69 or something. I think I got a system at a pawn shop actually with a Turbo Tap, which is this little device here. You could have up to 5 players playing sports games and a few little role-playing games and stuff. The controllers, were very reminiscent of, Nintendo. This little cover here would come loose, and you could put like an AV kit, a battery backup kit, or the CD add-on connected to it. And I think they were either supposed to release like a CD-ROM adapter for like PCs and stuff, but where you could use the CD add-on, and the CD would it was like a Discman. It would disconnect from the base, and you could take it out in your car or whatever and play music CDs. TurboGrafx to me was a pretty awesome system, though. I mean, I really enjoyed even the base games. What is that one called? Keith Courage and Alpha Zones. It's kind of like platform meets role playing. Really cool music. There were a lot of cool shooters on it. There were, some strategy games like Military Madness. There was like the Bonk's Adventure. They're, kind of their competition to Mario. Although I didn't really get into that. You had JJ and Jeff, and you had Legendary Acts 1 and 2. And on the CD system, you had like this cool Rambo-like game called Last Alert. There were other games, and you could eventually get a upgraded super CD cart or whatever, which goes into the little Hue card thing, and it would upgrade the RAM and allow for the Turbo Duo or Super CD games to be played. And in North America, there really wasn't a whole lot of games released on it. But in Japan, you could get a lot of RPGs, and this is the case in pretty much every 8, 16, and 32-bit console. Was in Japan, you had all these things that never got an English North American release, and some of them did get released, but a lot of them never came to America, unlike today, which is a little bit different on modern consoles or whatever. So an RPG series called Ys, which is YS, was introduced to me through the TurboGrafx CD. Yspoken 1 and 2 was like, the all-time, just really long compilation of 2 games that were previously released on like 8-bit consoles and computer systems in Japan and stuff in the past, and they added the cut scenes and all that stuff, and voices and stuff versus like text, and those games were so good that as soon as I beat the game, and you could not play 2 without beating 1 on this particular one, if I remember right, I started all over, and I played through it knowing all the secrets that, kind of took me a while to figure out, in the first run. So I probably played through the whole game probably 3 times. So that game alone at the time would have been worth the whole purchase price of the console and CD system to me. One of the stinkers that I had a long time ago was an Atari Jaguar, and the controller was just, in my opinion, just not very good. And I did not get many games for it, just like 3 or 4. I had nothing called my name, not even really the CD attachment. And it was just, I tried to sell it at a flea market, and I couldn't get anybody to even buy it for like $25. Nobody was interested in it. So I just about gave it away, back in the day. I did not know it would be such a collector's item now, and who knows how many hundreds or whatever it's worth. Another thing was I had a Neo Geo CD, and of course people that were into gaming knew what the Neo Geo home system was, and they knew what the Neo Geo arcade system was, and they had a cheap version called the Neo Geo CD system. I think it had a whole lot less RAM, so instead of loading all the game or whatever into the RAM, the memory, it used a CD-ROM that loaded a little bit at a time. And I think most of the iterations of that system were 1x speed, and there may have been a 2x speed one at the end. But loading like a fighting game that's kind of fast-paced and all was just horrible. But as far as gameplay, once you're actually in the game, it's pretty much indistinguishable from the regular Neo Geo, as far as I can tell. I kind of like the Neo Geo CD gamepad, even though a lot of people like the joystick controller or whatever, arcade style controller better. I've never had a chance to play with one like that though. Another kind of stinker of a system, I guess you would call, is the Philips CDI. So I guess the story was that Nintendo was trying to make a CD-ROM based system for the Super Nintendo, and they had 2 companies involved, Philips and Sony. And when those deals fell through, Sony got to make their own version, kinda using the technology and research and development and all, and it became the PlayStation 1. Philips used their knowledge and whatever to create the edutainment system, the CDI, and they had their own kind of version of digital movies that were kind of VCD, MPG-1, low-res based movies, and they had games. And if you wanted the I don't know if it's FM video or whatever it is, it's probably possibly like MPG-1 video, you would have to buy a digital video cartridge. So games like Space Ace and Dragon's Lair and all that, Mad Dog McCree, you would have to have this this digital video cartridge to play it. Have a handful of games for it. I've only played it for a few minutes just to make sure it worked. There's just no reason for me to spend any time with it. It's probably just going to be a museum piece. And another one is the Texas Instrument TI-99-4A, and this is not a picture of that. This is a picture of a Commodore 64 bread box, or whatever you want to call it. They had a different, slightly different version of like a Model 2, the 64C, which I kind of liked better, but for the TI-99-4A, it was just another system. You know, you could do some business stuff with it, and I guess they had modems. You know, very slow, like 1200 baud or 300 baud modems, and terminal software. There were games. There were cassette drives. There were floppy drives. You know, RS-230 through 232 ports for other things, probably printers, or there were various RAM upgrades, like what they called the PEB, or peripheral expansion box. You had a speech synthesizer, which I thought was awesome at the time. This is probably like 1982ish, and I'm sitting here playing Parsec and Alpiner with the speech synthesizer, and you have all these cool speeches, warning, asteroid field ahead, or something like that, or maybe you're falling off a mountain or something, and you hear some weird voice go, "Oh no," or something like that. So that was definitely a cool experience, and not many people would have had the system, I don't think. And maybe when it went on clearance, Eckerd's Drugs and stuff like that used to carry a lot of like Atari games and VHS tapes, and the computer systems, once they were being cleared out, for $50 or $99 or whatever. So it's weird to think that you would have went to a drugstore in the olden days to buy TVs and video games and stuff like that, but that's how it happened in the olden days. The Wii U, that may be the system, the Nintendo system, that was probably the worst selling one. They just put so much money into the actual main controller of the screen and all, this piece here, that they just could not bring the price down over time to get it to a reasonable level to consumers. So over time we expect a $500 system to go down to $249 or whatever, or even $149, and it didn't happen. And I guess they could not find a workaround, a way around getting their costs down enough to make it a successful system over time. There were some cool games, like the Donkey Kong franchise, like the Donkey Kong Country and Tropical Freeze or whatever. Super Mario games, and a Zelda game or two. And it's a shame that so much money was put into the controller itself, but I really haven't played it. I bought this just to have it in my collection, and I'm surprised I have not played it at least a little bit. I'll go back to the 7800 for a minute and tell you one other thing that kind of sealed the fate of this system. At the time when you had a 2600, people invested so much money into a system and all that. People expected to have an upgrade, like to send their 2600 to Atari to have it upgraded, just a couple chips changed out in it, to make it a 7800 Super Pro system. And that mindset is also one of the reasons why it failed. But we're going to talk, there's a reason why I brought that up, because we're going to be talking about another system. That system is the Sega 32X add-on. So Sega was developing the Sega, Sega of Japan, I guess, was developing the Sega Saturn 32-bit console. But Sega of America had other ideas. Let's build this in between system. Let's make, you know, our 16-bit Sega Genesis or Mega Drive and a 32-bit system. So they've probably seen what happened with Atari on the 2600, 7800 fiasco, and decided, oh, it's best to do this. And I think it was against the wishes of Sega of Japan, but they went ahead and released the system. It was a dud because people had already moved away from that mindset that they could just upgrade their system, and you know, by then people probably realized, you know, with PCs and stuff, you could only upgrade your PC so much, you know, slightly bigger CPU, slightly bigger hard drive, a little bit more RAM or video card before something becomes a bottleneck or something becomes incompatible with the bus speed, you know, and or just incompatible period.